Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Aurelio Muraca. I'm the founder of the Western Connecticut UFO Conference, and on behalf of the Danbury Library and friends of the Danbury Library, I welcome you to this special presentation by Michael Panicello, the State Director of Connecticut MUFON. And tonight's presentation will be talking about UFO sightings in Connecticut, past and present. And Michael, you have the comm.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for attending this evening's event on a rather rainy Monday. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day. What I am going to do is start with one of my favorite quotes, the quote I use in every lecture I ever give. And it's called, ridicule is not part of the scientific method, and people should not be taught that it is. And this is so important for a number of reasons. Most importantly, ufology is often ridiculed. We are the people with the tinfoil hats, the ones that hear, the conspiracies everywhere. And often that's not the case. Ufologists, for the most part, are very scientific people. They try to present the evidence as best they can in a clear and concise manner. And for myself, as a researcher, I try to do that. And I tried to do that in tonight's presentation. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something from it. And more importantly, I hope it inspires you to pick up the mantle of UFO research and go explore this field for yourself, because it's a very rich field. And there's many, many avenues that you can go down and explore. And I hope that's something that you'll definitely want to pursue. And if I can help you in any way, please let me know. My contact information is below. I have good sources to follow on with you, to share if you want, but I do hope that this presentation will inspire you to look into this field a little more. Who am I? I always put this in because for any kind of research you do, whether it's ufology or in the science field or any kind of academic research, or just researching a doctor, you're going to a new doctor for the first time. The one thing everyone universally wants to know is, who is this person? What makes this person an expert? What makes this person qualified to even be up here giving me information on this topic? So this is my answer to that question. My name is Mike Panicello. I'm the State Director for Connecticut MUFON. I am part of the MUFON Strike Team, which is called the Strike Area Team Area Research, a field investigator, a CAG International team member, and CAG stands for Case Assistance Group. So you're like, well, what is this? What is these? Well, Strike Team, I always equate this to like the A team. You have your A team for football, you have your A team for hockey, your A line. If a UFO crashes in your backyard tonight and you call up MUFON National and you say, hey, I got a UFO in my backyard. Well, MUFON's going to call me and they're going to send out the STAR team. We're the ones that would go and investigate it. Hopefully would get there before the military, but chances are probably not the case. We do more advanced investigations, abduction cases, evidence cases, that if there's evidence left behind of a UFO crash, this would be the kind of cases we'll handle. CAG International is a case assistance group. This basically means we assist cases internationally. And I've done cases all over the world. That doesn't mean I've gone to them. With modern technology, there's a lot of ways to keep in touch with people that are overseas. We talk to them through email, through the internet phone, like Google Voice, Zoom. There's a lot of ways that we can talk to people and get their cases on record. And then lastly, I've been doing this for over 25 years. I originally got into it because I liked military aircraft. And of course, when you look into military aircraft and advanced military aircraft, inevitably, it always comes up with the question, oh, there's reverse engineering and technology, and that leads you down the UFO rabbit hole. So that's how I got involved, and I've been involved ever since. I've done over 200 field investigations in my career. So I've seen a lot, I've done a lot. And I think that tonight I'm going to talk about some of the really cool cases that have happened in Connecticut. So let me go on to my next slide. Who is MUFON and who is MUFON Connecticut? Now, this goes back to my previous point of who are we and why are we qualified to do this? You already know who I am. Let me tell you about who my organization is. MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network. It started in 1969 at the end of Project Blue Book. We used to sell a shirt that said doing the Air Force's job since 1969. It's a funny shirt. I wish I got it, but it's no longer sold. The point is we've been investigating UFO research since 1969. We have a chapter in every state, and we're overseas. We have chapters in Canada, out in Europe, in France, Australia. So we're expanding outward, but we have a chapter in every state in the Union. MUFON Connecticut, I run a lot of events for the chapter. I run Skywatches, a ham radio net. So for those of you that are ham radio operators, join in our net. It's every Tuesday evening. I also run a UFO Bigfoot group. We have 2 book clubs, a CIA document research, and a conspiracy disclosure group. So let's get some terminology down first. Terminology is important because we're going to be using these few terms that I talk about tonight throughout this presentation. The first is an IFO, an identified flying object. And this is something that we know what it is. So I have some examples up here. In the upper corner above the plane, I have stars and planets. Often these are mistaken as space stations, craft in orbit, in synchronous orbit. Next to that, I have sky lanterns. Sky lanterns are often misrepresented as orbs. They are often very slow in the sky. Sometimes it's easy to identify sky lanterns because they move with the wind, in the direction of the wind. They're very slow. They don't last very long. If they're a flame, they usually catch fire and burn out very quickly. So within a few minutes of them being launched, they usually flame out in a little spark and then they disappear. Next to that, I have a piece of space debris that's coming into the atmosphere. Below that, I have an airplane on final approach. You can see that its landing gears are out, its flaps are fully extended, and it has its navigation lights on. Often aircraft at night, when it's a moonless night, are misidentified as triangle craft because a triangle craft, for the most part, has a very common identification in the reports. They're a triangle shape with 3 white lights in each corner and a blinking red light in the center of the 3 lights. If any of you have been to an airport around the approach or departure of a major airport, and you see a plane coming in on final or departure, it often looks like a triangle shape. So sometimes they are misidentified. Next to that, I have a weather balloon, often mistaken as some kind of orb in the sky. And next to that, I have a meteor. This is a meteor coming in on a long streak as it's burning up in the atmosphere. So this is often, think of people would come and say this is a craft coming into their atmosphere. Another common one is satellites. Satellites would be a little bit like this meteor, except without the tail. This would be like a long exposure, but it would just be a little bright little dot of light moving in one direction across the night sky. And that is often considered, it's often what a meteor will look like. I mean, sorry, a satellite. Now, unidentified flying objects. These are the ones that we are here to talk about tonight. Now, it's very important that you understand that UFO does not always mean extraterrestrial. Hollywood and society has moved the two together. They're often termed in the same like little bubble. Like you have one, you have the other. That's not the case in ufology. Unidentified just means that it's unidentified. We don't know what it is. There's not enough information, or there is just not enough material in either the evidence submitted, like the photo is a blurry photo, or the video is too short. There's not enough material to accurately determine what was seen. So we classified it as an unknown. In UFO and military investigations, we actually moved away from that to UAV, unknown aerial vehicle, or unknown aerial phenomena, UAP. Those of you that have been following the news with like Lou Elizondo and the Pentagon project over the last few years, they have 2017 is when the Pentagon project came out that they were actually investigating UFOs. That's what Lou Elizondo was part of. These terms have been in the news a lot lately, either UAP or UAV. These are the new modern terms for UFO. And what we have here are the traditional UFO in the center. We also have a classified military craft in the lower corner. That was supposed to be a shot of the Aurora, supposedly the mysterious unknown spy plane that the US military has. But it could be any aircraft. F-22s, the F-117, the F-35, the B-2, even the U-2 were all misidentified as extraterrestrial craft until they became declassified. And then UFO researchers went back and looked at the sightings and then saw that the sightings match where these craft are being tested, or even some of the military reports come out and say, this is really a U2, or this was that, or this with this. So even our own technology can be considered unknown because they're classified. In the upper corner, we have a window with white orbs. In the paranormal field, orbs are often common when you take photos, and the same true in ufology. In this case, was created by lens flare. The object has a reflection on the light reflected off the lens of the camera, created lens flares. And in the center, like I said, we have a UFO. Below that, we have a traditional triangle. I'm sorry, to the left of that, we have a traditional triangle. Below that, we have the planets. They're often, like I said earlier, misidentified as either a space station or some kind of object, some kind of craft in stationary orbit in the sky above us. And then right in the center above the word term, we have what looks like a blimp. These are like the triangle cylinder crafts that we so often hear about, but don't really have good photos of, but they're reported a lot. So these are the two terms I'd like you to keep in mind when we are talking about our lecture today. So let's get into it. So let's go back in time to 1967. A historical article. This is from the Springfield Republican newspaper. So this actually made the newspaper. This is the actual newspaper. And if you can read the headline below that, I'm not sure if all of you can, so I'll just quickly read some of it. I read the important parts. A 12-year-old boy said he made this picture of an object in the sky at his home. It was silvery, had pipe-like projections. The boy said that it produced a roar like a jet engine's. Neighbors said they heard an unusual noise in the sky, but did not see the mysterious object. So this is one example that actually made national, the local news. It didn't make national, but it made the local news. And at the time, they couldn't identify it. So it is a UFO. Now you could say, well, maybe that's a mylar balloon or some kind of balloon-like object. And that's certainly possible. But without, you can make the assumption. But as an investigator, we would want the negative. We want to be able to look at the actual negative and interview the witness and gather more information if there's possible other witnesses that had a different angle to this object. So for our purposes, we'd probably call it a UFO, possibly a balloon. But in the case of the historical record, the media at the time did classify this as a UFO in Connecticut. And one thing you might want to keep note of, because we'll talk about this later, is the noise. And we'll talk about that in a later slide. So this is one in Winstead. This was in 1980. And this is actually a very interesting case. This was by 4 people saw this. It was in the evening. They looked at this object for about a half an hour. And it was it was straight up. It was like this at a 40-degree angle. I actually know the person who saw this particular object. So I got the information firsthand from the witness. And after watching the craft about a half hour, it just moved, it disappeared. Now, what's interesting about that is if any of you know who Bob Lazar is, or if you don't know who Bob Lazar is, I would say Google him or DuckDuckGo him, or whatever search engine you use, and read about who this person is, because he is a supposed whistleblower that talks about how UFO craft move. And one of the things he says is that when these crafts are about ready to take off, they may go from like a vertical or a horizontal. So sometimes they might be vertical, but most of the time they're horizontal, to a slight angle, and then they take off. So you have this person, this was in 1980, and Bob Lazar came out in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, talking about this. So you have this connection between two different events. Bob Lazar was out in Las Vegas. We talked to Georgia Knapp. He was on TV. He didn't know about the Winstead event, and this happened before him. And yet the way they both describe these craft as moving at going to an angle and then taking off is interesting. So let's go to the next one. This is another one. This is the same sighting, but just another magazine picked it up. This was the Globe magazine. This is another interesting one. This was in North Granby, Connecticut, and this happened in January 1961. A witness was driving along Route 189. Witness was very familiar with this route. 3 witnesses then saw this object. It was 50 feet off to the right of the road. It's hovering low over a field. It was described as big as a house. It was all white in color, and it had blinking white lights. Now, blinking white lights in the old UFO sightings, blinking white lights are often attributed to UFOs. And today, in the more modern sightings, UFOs that have blinking white lights are really just with the triangles. But this object was the shape of a disc, and this fits with the UFO sightings of the 1960s and early 70s. So, and it had a dome on the center of the craft. So this is like a traditional flying saucer, and this does kind of fit within the narrative of what the sightings were like. You can almost say that UFO sightings have evolved over time. In the 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, you had the traditional shaped craft. You had these weird objects that had a dome on them, or they were more like a boomerang shaped. But then you go into the 90s and into the 21st century, 2000s and on, and they're triangle shaped craft and they're orbs. So you have like more mechanical craft in the early part of the 20th century, the mid part of the 20th century. And then now in this new 21st century, we have orbs and we have triangle shaped craft. So is it possible that these mechanical craft were ours? It is. And there is some theories to that. There was some evidence that show that these might have been some kind of test equipment of the Air Force or the defense industry, which will explain why they're more mechanical in nature and not so much supernatural like they are now with the orbs, like the red orbs and the orange orbs that so often are reported. And we'll get into some of those sightings in a few minutes. The object stayed in one place for about 10 minutes and then it moved. It came back. Now, this is interesting, this sighting, for 2 reasons. One, as I said earlier, is it fits the narrative of what the UFO sightings were like during this period of time. But 2, it was listed in the Condon Committee report. So you have a Connecticut sighting being written up in a official Air Force document. Now, the Condon Committee wrote the Condon report, which was the official end of Project Blue Book. Basically, what they said is everything is either explained as swamp gas or balloons or we're all just crazy people. And that's how they kind of closed the case on Project Blue Book. But in this case, the Condon Committee could not find an answer. They listed it as an unknown. So you have this committee that was set up to debunk UFOs and make us all look like we are misidentifying common everyday items. And then they come back and say, well, we don't know what this is. And they put it on record as they don't know what it is. So this is interesting. This report, this sighting and this report are really good documents to show that Connecticut had something unusual happen in January of 1967. Here's another one. This was again in 1967 and again in Winsted. As a side note, Litchfield County up in the Winsted area is a very hotbed it's a virtual hotbed of activity. We have a lot of UFO sightings up there. There's also some weird paranormal sightings and some cryptozoology sightings up there. So for those of you that live in the Winsted area and up in Litchfield County, you live in a very unique area. We've done a lot of research up there, and I suspect that we will be doing more research up there as time goes on and time allows, because we are volunteers. So this one was teenagers from Camp Delaware. They saw saucers 15 to 20 feet in diameter. It was above Blueberry Hill. It was a daylight hike. They heard a high-pitched whine. It sounded like feedback from a loudspeaker. Now, if you remember earlier, I told you to keep in mind that roar-like sound from that other sighting with the little boy that had the photo of what I said might be a Mylar balloon. It could also have been a plane. But my point is the reason I asked you to remember that is because of this sighting here. The fact that it was a high-pitched whine and feedback from a loudspeaker. The thing about humans and eyewitnesses is we all see and hear things differently. That's why eyewitness testimony is sometimes difficult to only go on that. You want the physical evidence, because how you and I might experience the same event could be completely different, even though we both saw the same event. The fact that they heard this kind of high-pitched sound, this feedback, could mean that it was the same type of sound, just interpreted differently. Now, that's a stretch on my part. I am admitting that. But so often, UFOs are reported as not hearing any sound. When you talk to a witness, even today, and if we look at some historical cases, you ask, and the witness was asked, "Did you hear anything?" They'll say no. Even today, when I ask a witness, "Did you hear anything when you saw the object?" They'd say no. This is one of the few examples where you hear something. So that's why I brought this up in the presentation. The next part, this was actually looked at by the Center for UFO Studies, and they gave it a 50% chance that it was true. Now, the Center for UFO Studies was started by J. Allen Hynek. He's the person who wrote and said the quote that I started off this lecture with. I call him the grandfather of modern ufology, because he's tried to bring ufology into a more scientific approach, the more scientific realm. He started off as a debunker for Project Blue Book, saw so much evidence that convinced him that there might be something to this, and became a UFO believer. The Great New England Blackout, 11/9/1965. This is a great example of ufology in Connecticut for two reasons. Because it affected everybody. All of New England at the time got affected. And for Connecticut, it was no different. The Nightcap did a wonderful investigation on this. And if you can Google the report, you should. It used to be out there in the public. And what they found is that before, during, and after the sightings, before, during, and after the blackout, there was UFO sightings all over New England, all over upstate New York, into Canada, down into Connecticut. And these sightings were reported in major newspapers in the local area. So like the Syracuse papers, some of the New York papers, even a Canadian paper reported UFO sightings. So this made the news of that this blackout could have been caused by a UFO. More importantly, Dr. James McDonald, a top ufologist of the day from Arizona, he's an academic, so that's big. At the time, academics really were not too gave us too much time of day. You know, we were always persona non grata in academia, and to an extent, we still are today. But he testified to Congress when asked by the congressman from New York if it's possible that a UFO caused this. He said there wasn't enough evidence, and it's possible. And this got into the congressional record. So this is something big, that you have someone telling Congress that it is possible that this could have been caused by a UFO. There's not enough evidence to rule it out. Because normally what they would say is, no, it has nothing to do with ufology. No one really would go on the record. It would be career suicide. But this person did, and he actually said that there might have been a UFO connection. So I think this is great. Night siege, as was talked about at the beginning, Connecticut had a lot of sightings from the Hudson Valley UFO flap. We have sightings all over Connecticut. And in fact, I was teaching a class a few years ago, and one of the persons in my class, he was working in East Hartford at the time, and he was reporting UFO sightings during the Hudson Valley period up in East Hartford. He said he saw some unknown objects. So ufology, this event has really solidified New York, upstate New York, as a UFO hotspot. But Connecticut did have a very, was affected by this. And today, a lot of our triangle sightings are still along the New York-Connecticut border, going from Litchfield County down to Fairfield. We have a lot of sightings in that area, even to this day. So could it be that whatever caused the Hudson Valley flap in the 80s are still around today and causing the sightings? It's possible. We don't know. But it's an interesting coincidence. And if you want to read a great book on it, since this is a book event sponsored by the library, Night Siege, the definitive work on it, other than Linda Zimmerman, who has been a more modern researcher. She has written some great books on it too. But these are great sources for you to start your UFO researching. So if any of you are interested in this, look up books by Linda Zimmerman and this book by J. Allen Hynek. They're great sources to start off in the field. And then from there, you can build on your ufology. But this is a good introduction. Okay, so now we're going to get into present UFO sightings in Connecticut. The first one happened in Bloomfield, Connecticut on May 16, 2021, between 5:55 p.m., 7:55 p.m. and 8 p.m. This is a screenshot. This is actually from Google Earth of the location and the distance that it started. Now, normally in person, I have a little pointer and I'll do my little pointing. Where the 0 is where it was last seen. So where the 714.545, that is the location where the witness was standing, where the witness saw the object. And this witness was able to see the object because it was high enough in the air until it moved away to here approximately over the golf course. So he saw this for about 500 meters. These are photos of the object. You can see a little black dot in the sky. And then the little dots in red show the direction that the object was moving in. And if you were to follow these dots, it would be going straight to where that golf court is. The object moved right from left. It flipped and turned flat. Then it moved continuous to move away from me and shifting a little bit with the wind. Now, the reason this doesn't sound really grammatically correct is I copied this from the witnesses. This is the witness statement. No editing on my part. So this is what the witness submitted to us. And what is interesting about this sighting is that the modern ufology has the hypothesis that maybe the reason why these objects are flipped and turned and then flat, and then it moves again into like more of a weird shape that's kind of folding and bending in on itself, is that the object might actually not be completely in our dimension. The theory or the hypothesis today in ufology is that these craft are multi-dimensional craft. So when they're moving, they're not moving in one dimension. Like in the 1960s, we thought that they were moving in our space. You know, like that one from 1980, the object went up to 40 degrees and then disappeared. The assumption at the time was that they were moving in our space, in our three-dimensional space. Now, ufology has kind of evolved, and they're thinking the hypothesis could be these craft are actually moving in multiple dimensions. So as the object is moving in and out of dimensions, it looks to us as they're bending and morphing and becoming flat, but it's just because they're not all in our dimension. So that's one hypothesis, and that's why I bring this up on this slide, because there's not enough information to really determine what this is. So it's classified as an unknown. But the way the object was described as moving and bending and turning and becoming flat again, and then going back into something that had shape, it might lend to the fact that it leads a little bit to this hypothesis that these things are multidimensional, and this could have been a multidimensional craft. This is another object. This happened in Newington, January 11th, 2021. This was a triangle sighting. These are the witnesses' drawings. This was above the tree line. 2 witnesses saw this at 8:50 p.m. It was treetop level, about a quarter of a mile north of our position along the Berlin Turnpike. And they saw this triangles for 6 to 10 seconds. So very, very fast. This thing just like whizzed right by them, like whoosh, it was gone. No sound. No sound was reported with these objects. So again, this is a triangle sighting. I told you these happen a lot in Connecticut. And if you remember my previous statement that one of the people in my classes saw a triangle sighting in East Hartford. Well, East Hartford is very close to Newington. And it, could have been related back again to the Hudson Valley Flap. I don't know. But what I do know is, as I said, we still get a lot of UFO triangle sightings in Connecticut, especially along the New York, Connecticut border. And it's not unusual for them to be to move a little bit further. Maybe they like Blueback Square and they went to get a pizza somewhere. I don't know, but they do sometimes pop up in this area. So, and if you also look at the photos, you will see that it is a traditional triangle sighting. You have the 3 white lights, you can see them. And then if you look in the center, you see like what looks like a circle. That's the witness's drawing of that blinking red light. So again, a traditional looking triangle with no sound. So this happened in Stamford, Connecticut on January 11th, 2021. Witness saw 6 or more glowing lights. The orbs, these are an orb, or supposedly an orb. Orbs are flying in random directions, formed a flight formation. No aircraft or man-made object was seen at the time. Now, this is an interesting sighting for a number of reasons. One, it's an orb sighting, so it shows you an example of the orbs in Connecticut that we get. 2, that it was multiple orbs and together in one group. This is also very common with UFO orb sightings. You don't see, occasionally you do. I shouldn't say that. Occasionally you'll get like a 1 orb sighting, but most of the time they are 2 or more sightings. They're in groups and they are in a flight formation. They usually move around each other. They move, they interact with each other. They're in some kind of formation. It looks like they are under intelligent control. And you could say, well, it could be variable winds. So that could be sky lanterns. Well, not if they're moving against the wind. if they're moving up, if they're moving down, if they're moving sideways, right or left, or in a formation. That's usually not what a Skylander can do because it's at the mercy of the wind. So it doesn't have the same flight characteristics. The other thing you could say, well, maybe there are drones. The problem with that is that drones are becoming more sophisticated, absolutely. But you can often say that a drone is usually within the area that it's being controlled in. Now, more and more drones are becoming more complicated where they can move away from one location, but often people that own these more expensive commercial drones will only fly like one drone. Yes, there are drone clubs out there, but they all follow the rules of the FFA. They stay out of restricted airspace. They stay up within the altitude they are prescribed. And these orbs kind of just do whatever they want, for lack of better reason. So I guess what I'm trying to say is drones are usually within the FFA flight characteristics that they're required to be in, and orbs are a little more free-spirited, shall we say. So that's something that's a little bit different. You can kind of rule out a drone from an orb. This was another unknown triangle. This one is interesting because it shows a witness living near an Air Force base. So witness credibility is often the most important part of any kind of investigation we do. Yes, we would prefer to have video and some kind of photographic evidence, but even with that, unless it's absolutely the best, we still like to have the witness. And most of our cases, we don't have that, so it's only the witness. So witness credibility, whether there is evidence or there's not evidence, is always important. And in this case, it was important because this witness grew up in an Air Force base. The witness was father was an Air Force personnel, and they moved around to a lot of bases. They knew what the aircraft looked like, and they never seen any of this before. So we classified this as an unknown because it was the characteristics of a triangle, perfect black triangle. It had the red and white lights, typical of a black triangle. And the witness credibility, they knew the information. I am running out of time. I have about 5 minutes left before Q&A, so I'm going to skip some slides. I'll move through them a little quicker, I should say, too. Alien abductions. This is one from a witness that was abducted in the mid-90s. This is the drawing the witness saw when the witness was brought aboard the craft. These are traditional gray-looking aliens. The big eyes, the little lips, they're usually gray colored, and they have no emotions. They're usually reported as being almost robotic in nature, which leads a lot of people to think they were biologically created entities, that they were not, they don't have a soul. They're not really like humanoid. They're more machine and robotic. And they talk through telepathy. I'm going to skip this one. So not everything is a UFO. And this gives you a little bit of an example of our research method. If anyone can see in the right corner, there is like a little bird or like some kind of object. It's right there in the far left corner, right on the water line. I will blow it up so you can see it. Now, when I got this case, I investigated this case, and it was my second case I ever investigated. And I remember getting this photo and be like, yes, I got my photo. It is a UFO coming out of the Long Island Sound. I have definitive proof UFOs are in the Long Island Sound. I'm good to go. And I was determined, not determined, but I was really convinced that this was a UFO. But as a good investigator, I did my due diligence and I did the full investigation. And I started off by looking at the photo. Now, if you remember earlier, I said I would always like the negative, but I would really prefer to have the original photo if I cannot get the negative. Originals are always better, than a copy. And what I did was I reversed the negative and I ran it through some filters. And this is what I got. Now, anyone guess what this is? It's actually an osprey. And you can see the tail and the neck. And if you were to get really close, you can see the eyeball. So this is a bird. Now, to confirm that it was a bird, we contacted the local bird society. We checked to see what their nests were, and they live in marshy areas. We went down to the location. We actually looked in the marshes area and we found the nests. We checked with some boaters in the area who confirmed seeing these birds around the time of this sighting. We also checked their migration patterns to know that they were in that area, to confirm what the boat people said and the bird people. So we did our due diligence. We looked into this and we turned a UFO into an IFO. And that's really what we do. We're not going out to debunk. We're trying to provide credible evidence of UFO encounters that will handle a skeptic's inquiry. A skeptic coming in and saying, well, did you do this? Yes, we did that. Did you do that? Yes, we did that. We try to do our due diligence. So that's the end of my presentation, and I have 15 minutes for question and answers. So does anyone have anything they would like to ask me?
Please go ahead and type it in the chat and I will relate it to Michael. Please type it in any of your questions in the chat and I will relate them to Michael. How do you become an investigator?
Sure. So the information on how to become an investigator, you can find that on our website. It's mufonct.com, MUFONCT.com, or you can Google us, MUFON Connecticut, and we usually come up right away on the search engine. The process is several-fold. The first is you'd have to join MUFON, become a member. You would purchase a field investigator manual, and then you'll study it and take an online exam through MUFON University. When you pass the exam, we would then ask that you do a background check. We'll have some paperwork that you sign off and we do a background check. Once you pass the exam and pass the background check, you will become what is called a field investigator trainee. At that point, you'll begin working with either myself or my chief investigator, and you would work with us on cases. So one of us would be the lead, you would be the assistant. You would work with us, learning the case, learning how to do the procedures, learning how to do the investigation, learning how to interview witnesses, learning how to do photo analysis, all of the steps that are needed to close out a case, either as an IFO or a UFO. Once you do several of those and you start feeling comfortable, then the roles will reverse. You would become the primary investigator, and either myself or my chief investigator will become the secondary. And then you would take the lead on the case and we will assist you. And then once you feel comfortable enough doing those cases a few times, I will promote you to a field investigator, a full field investigator, at which point you will be able to do investigations on your own or with one of our other investigators. So that's the process. It doesn't take long to go through the steps if you commit to it. I can't hear you, Aurelio.
Sorry about that. We have another question. One, we have someone who's taken a video of crafts over the last few days. One was a white one that sped past them in the video, and another was some small black ships traveling very fast across the sky, too small to enlarge. And these were taken during the daylight. Question, have you heard of this type of craft sighting? And the white one was the size of a bird, and both were taken in slow motion, and all the objects were moving very fast and seen flipping over and over again. And they talked about, and they're located in Litchfield County.
Litchfield County again. You guys, that's an interesting county for paranormal stuff and UFOs. I don't know, it's not something in the water up there, I guess. Um, White objects, I've heard of white orbs. They're rare. I more hear of colored orbs that are orange or red in nature. I have heard of blue orbs before, only on the Skinwalker Ranch. I've never seen them outside of Skinwalker Ranch. Um, but that sounds like a very interesting sighting. I guess if I saw the video, maybe I could look at it a little better. But small black ships, I'm not sure if I've seen that. I've heard of triangles. It could have been a triangle. Like I was saying in the PowerPoint presentation, that the one in Newington of the triangles was only seen for like 6 or 7 seconds. So it flew by. So at that point, 6 or 7 seconds flying by that quickly could have been a small object as well, or at least very small. But that's really the only reference I have. But I'd love to see the video. If you want to put in a report to MUFON, we'll investigate it for you.
Yes, I think that that would be best. If you can, reach out to MUFON Connecticut, to Michael, and send him the eyewitness report as well as a file to that video. Next question. Do you have any information about any of the UFO sightings in Rocky Hill of August of 1987?
Personally, no. So our online database only has become available from 1990 and on. Prior to 1990, we were still using paper copies. So that would be in the MUFON archives. Out right now, it's in Cincinnati. So I wouldn't have access to those files. If it was 1990 and on, I could always look on the database and get back to you. But I personally do not know of any sightings in 1987 in Rocky Hill.
Next question. Can you show us the head-on front view of the triangle photo that you have of the witness artwork? If not, what was the visual of, I mean, the verbal description? You can you share it?
Is this one? So the witness basically said that the object looked like a traditional triangle. It moved very fast. It was 6 to 10 seconds. It passed right over the witness and kept going. The witness was able to see the white lights and the triangle. It's possible that the 6 and 10 seconds might have been a stretch. It could have been a little bit longer. Time is always a relative thing, and the witness wasn't looking at their stopwatch, their watch at the time. So the witness is pretty sure it was 6 to 10 seconds, but it would move very fast. You would say, well, maybe how do you get such a good description? But if you look at the photo itself, there really is not much in the way of detail. It's very generic. It's just a black object with the lights. So it makes sense that they didn't see a lot of the craft. But the description was that of a triangle-shaped craft that was black with 3 white lights and a red light.
Another question. Have there been many alien witnesses or abductions in Connecticut?
Yeah, great question. Very good question. Connecticut doesn't have a lot of abductions on record with MUFON. I've only done 3 abductions in my time as a member of MUFON Connecticut. I started in 2012 and I became the state director in 2013. So in that span of time, I've only done 3. Now, prior to 2012, MUFON Connecticut was actually part of New England MUFON. Those records went to a different location. They went up to Massachusetts. But there hasn't been a lot of sightings from when I look back, because I get this question a lot. So I actually did some research into it. And the reason I bring up New England MUFON is that our structure was a little bit different back then, not saying that things got lost in the mail, so to speak, but we didn't have a state chapter. We had only 2 investigators at the time, so there wasn't much of in the way of research in Connecticut. Uh, so I don't know if if there's been people that have been abducted, and like a lot of times information comes to us through word of mouth because we're there. Like we'll be at a meeting, or I'd be at a lecture, and someone would say, hey, this happened to me, or hey, that this happened to my friend. And then I'll encourage them to report that to MUFON, which then in turn goes to us in Connecticut MUFON. But because there was only 2 people in all of the state of Connecticut, they didn't do a lot of the boots on the ground kind of thing. We're going to lectures and meeting people and talking to people. So I guess a lot of it was kind of like a dead zone in the way of information at that time. In the database, there's none. There's the ones I mentioned, the 3. But prior to that, I don't know of any. And that's hopefully that should change now that we have an established chapter in Connecticut.
Michael, another question. Any examples of communication from UFOs to eyewitnesses?
Direct communication would be like in an abduction. I had one abduction case where the witness was told by the alien, don't be afraid, we're not going to harm you. Another one, the one with the witness photo that I showed in here, let me pull it up. This one, it was just, I think it was nervousness, but it was calmness at the same time. I don't think that they were going to hurt the witness. Often they don't really tell me many of the details. I think it's still something they need to feel more comfortable with, and they really get to know me before they go into that. As for like communications on a more massive scale, so like something of the close encounters of the third kind, where they are there beaming out messages from their spaceship to the masses. No, I haven't seen that. But I think if that was the case, that would probably make more of the national news.
Have there been, like, say, for this particular incident in the mid 1990s, have there been multiple, say, reoccurrences? Has it happened just once, or have this abduction phenomena reoccurred to this one particular witness over and over again?
The witness who had the drawing is a very spiritual person who is open to communications with other entities, and so I would say yes. Contact with other beings of otherworldly nature, whether it be paranormal in nature or UFO alien in nature, has happened and probably continues to happen. The witness who I spoke about, who said, don't be afraid, we're not going to hurt you, that was the witness's only encounter that they remember of ever happening, of ever being abducted or ever being in contact with a witness. That witness kept in contact with Connecticut MUFON for about a year. And in that year, the witness never reported another sighting or an abduction. So the witness never saw anything, nor did the witness nor was the witness abducted. And then the witness just disappeared. He just moved on. And that often happens once they kind of tell their story, they move on. Abductions are common, though, to happen multiple times, and they often happen with families members. So if you were abducted, chances are someone else in your family has had abduction experiences themselves. So that's not uncommon to hear that abductions happen throughout someone's lifetime and throughout abductee's family. So
That's something that I think we will hear more on with Tom Reed, who is going to do his presentation on Saturday. Tom Reed was taken, not only him, but him, his brother, his mom, and his grandmother, by a craft in Sheffield, Massachusetts, and it's called the Berkshire UFO incident, and it's the only historically true incident of abduction or being taken in the United States. So it's been deemed as historically true. And that is something that I would say, if you're interested in, please register for Tom's talk on Saturday. We'll have another question. Do UFOs appear like in rainy weather? All types of, sort of, inclement weather?
I have not investigated a UFO sighting where they are in Connecticut where it's been snow or rain. Usually it would be in clear conditions because it's usually a visual sighting, like they see something. However, if you look at the macro scale and you look at the world sighting reports, sightings have occurred in all kinds of weather, in thunderstorms, in snowstorms, in cloudy weather that see like a craft moving between the fog. So nationwide or even worldwide, I have seen and read reports of crafts being seen or heard in bad weather, but in Connecticut, I have not experienced that yet. And it could just be a fluke. I mean, they're rare. Most of the time, sightings happen in clear weather because it's a visual thing. Someone looks up in the night sky and they see something. Someone is watching the stars and they see something, or they're daydreaming out there with their window at work and they see something. So that's more of how oftentimes these cases are reported to us, because it's just someone looking for them and they see them. But there are sightings out there where they are in inclement weather, but they're not as abundant as the fair weather sightings.
One more quick question, Mike, if we can, before we wrap things up.
Sure.
Have there been any landings here in the state of Connecticut?
No landings. Not that I'm aware. Not since I've been state director have we had a landing. We have had. I did do one. Well, I take that back. I don't know in a traditional sense of a landing as it put all four of its wheels on the ground. I did do a case in Colchester that happened in the early 80s, and it was actually a missing time case, and the craft was hovering right above a like a pond / marshy area, and a witness and a police officer both experienced this at the same time. They thought it was only 10 minutes that they were watching this craft, but it was actually 2 hours. And we actually did a lot of investigation on that sighting. We were able to find the police officer, but the police officer wouldn't go on record with us. They didn't respond to any of our contact attempts, which is fine. You know, some people don't want to talk about it. That's no problem at all. We respect their privacy. But that's kind of the closest thing I've had to like a landing. It's more of a hovering over a water scenario. I have heard indirectly, and this is why I don't really bring it up as like a true landing, is that there has been sightings of that Barkhamsted Reservoir of craft being hovering over the water. So I can't prove that, I can't verify that, but I can verify the one that I did in Colchester.
Excellent. Michael, thank you so much for your engaging talk this evening. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this rainy Monday evening. And I encourage you to sign up for the rest of the presentations during our Western Connecticut UFO conference for the rest of the week. And from the Danbury Library, I bid you a good evening.
Good evening.